This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Stick around to the end of the video to hear about a special offer they're making available through my channel. 6 months ago, I reviewed Darksiders 3, a game that was getting a right roasting from the commentariat. I came to it about a week or so after the reviews were released, and I was really surprised by how not bad it was. The reviews painted a picture of a broken, buggy, uninspired mess unworthy of the Darksiders name, but what I found was a relatively competent third-person action adventure. It didn't blow the doors off the genre, but nor did it fall flat in its face. It offered up some engaging melee combat that struck a fine balance between flashy spectacle fighter and more weighty, high HP enemy encounters like we're used to in something like Dark Souls, for example. Because that's the only other melee game that exists. With the critical drubbing that the game received, there were fears that this game would flop and that there wouldn't be a Darksiders 4, which would be a real shame since you wouldn't be able to experience the storyline of Strife, the fourth horseman of the apocalypse, and the only one we haven't yet had the chance to control in the series. Thankfully, Darksiders 3 sold just fine, thank you very much, making back its development and marketing costs in the first month alone. THQ have said that the game would only need to sell around 100,000 units for them to consider making a Darksiders 4, and given the game is profitable and that there's still clearly a lot of love out there for the Darksiders series, we can only assume that Gunfire Games are currently working on Darksiders 4, or at least that's certainly the hope. We don't know, but we hope. So who the hell is making Darksiders Genesis then? Well, that would be Airship Syndicate, the studio founded by the original creator of the Darksiders franchise, Joe Madureira. He was not involved in Darksiders 3 at all, so Genesis marks a strange arc for him whereby he's once again creating a game in the world he created, and this is where we get to the rub about Darksiders Genesis. I think you have to set your expectations sort of low for this one, because that's exactly what Joe does when he's asked why the game went isometric instead of the typical third-person perspective.
We went isometric for a few reasons on this game. The main one being that we are a small studio, and so, you know, for us, we'll only try to focus on games that we can do well. And
much of the reason that Darksiders 3 was so maligned by critics and fans was because it felt like a game made on a budget, where the scale and legacy of the Darksiders franchise was more deserving of something bigger, more ambitious. But business is business, and THQ only had a certain amount of cash to play with as they were putting it together. I thought they spent that money well on things that mattered, and I think they pulled off the whole thing pretty well overall. Many others don't agree and feel like the budget nature of the title was ultimately its undoing. Darksiders Genesis is an even smaller, more constrained entry than even Darksiders 3. It's an isometric game because animating it this way is much cheaper and easier than full third person. It doesn't have full motion cutscenes, opting instead for stills. Even in the playing of it, it feels rather simple and unambitious rather than reaching for a refined and reinvigorated vision of isometric combat. The upside is that this time around, the game seems to have learned the lessons of Darksiders 3, which was universally criticized for charging $60 for what felt like a $40 game. Even I felt that, and I actually liked it. Genesis is selling for $39 on consoles and $29 on PC, and based on what I've played so far, that sort of feels like generally the right price point, maybe a little bit high, maybe a bit on the high side. I was sent an early access build of the game where I got to play through one level including a boss, and also participate in the boss battle mode where I load in and immediately start fighting a boss. I'm not sure if this is a different boss encounter than I would have experienced typically through the campaign, or if it's some sort of souped up special boss that's only available in this game mode. I'm not sure. I'm sure we'll learn all about that closer to the release date. So, how does the game play? Well, look, it's okay. Sometimes it feels pretty cool. Sometimes it feels not great. It's definitely a mixed bag, so let me spell out exactly how all of this works. The best way to think about Darksiders Genesis is that it's a normal Darksiders game, just in an isometric perspective. When I saw the change in view, my imagination ran wild. Was this like a twin-stick shooter? Was it Darksiders Diablo? Was it a full ARPG with a loot game? It's none of those things. It really does play very much like Darksiders 1, which was essentially a spectacle fighter. Enemies have very low HP and they die quickly, there's no loot game whatsoever, and from what I can tell, there doesn't appear to be any Metroidvania elements either. It feels like a very straight up and down isometric action game with some light puzzle elements. The shtick is that this time we get to control Strife, the gun-wielding horseman who to this point has not been playable, as well as War, the horseman from the first game. You can play through the entire game co-op with the two of you on screen at once, or you can switch between the two characters at any point in time with the press of a button. Strife plays in a way that feels very familiar if you've played twin-stick shooters. Use the right stick to aim your shots and fire off either quick rounds or slower, more weighty rounds. You can also charge up your shot for more meaty damage. As you land shots with your gun, you accumulate a sort of rapid fire gauge, which when it charges, it allows you to shoot out bullets like a machine gun. He also has a melee ability, and I think one of the biggest criticisms that I have of the game at this point is that his melee just feels more powerful and more effective than your guns. Shooting with Strife just feels super weak, way weaker than it should, and I expect that this will get some balancing during development to encourage us to actually shoot with Strife, which is kind of the whole point of his character. War plays pretty much the same as he did in the first game. He's all about big wide arcs with his massive sword, huge thrusts, and massive charged AoE abilities. War's fantasy has always been one of an unstoppable force carving through swathes of enemies, and the same design philosophy is very much intact here. Mechanically, the combat felt tight, responsive, and enjoyable. It's not deep per se, or at least it's not yet. There are combos that you sort of execute, but they're very simple. It's not like you can chain together massive 34-hit combos, keeping yourself and your enemy suspended for prolonged periods of time. It's very transactional. You go in, you hit them 3 or 4 times, perform and execute with the B button, and then move on to the next. The developers have promised that combat will evolve somewhat, but this looks like it will be more limited. For example, Strife will get new ammo types, and War will get enhancements, whatever that means. It's unclear if new combo options will open up as we progress through the game, so we'll just have to watch this space. The normal enemies you're fighting as you progress throughout the level don't pose much of a challenge, at least not in the difficulty I was playing, but I have to call out the boss design, which is already feeling really challenging and interesting. The 2 bosses I fought both had mechanics that made them feel almost like bullet hell games. If you played Nier Automata, it will sort of feel a little bit familiar. One boss would summon new challenges as I got his health further and further down, like a coffin that constantly spawned skeletons, or a book that would periodically attack me, and I had to choose whether to kill those things that he spawned, or simply ignore them and keep DPSing the boss, trying to dodge all of these new obstacles as I did so. It was definitely very tricky, and I can already see a pretty cool future for boss design in Genesis. When you're not doing the whole combat thing, you're doing a lot of traversal of environments and puzzle solving, and it's here that I started to have some big problems with the game. Most of it involved jumping from pillar to pillar or climbing ledges, but so often it just isn't clear where you need to go. Like, I spent 5 minutes here trying to figure out where the game wanted me to go, but eventually I realized the game just wanted me to jump up to the ledge above me. Much of this is to do with camera not making things clear, a problem that absolutely has plagued the Darksiders series from the start, including number 3. It's definitely still a problem here. I mean, for example, the whole jump and hook thing is back, only now sometimes you can't really see where the hooks are until after you've jumped, and you're just kind of taking this leap of faith. It doesn't feel great. The puzzles as well were very simple and felt more like pacing mechanisms than actual puzzles. Stuff like pull this lever down and then go over there before the timer runs out, or just pull 2 levers down, etc. Done. I think the Metroidvania and puzzle solving elements of Darksiders 3 were sort of its saving grace. There was some really interesting stuff there that they did with environment design and level design and, the way your character abilities interacted with that. I sort of worry that if those Metroidvania elements don't return here, we might be in for a fairly flat feeling adventure overall. Stepping back and looking at my brief time with Genesis, I'm really struggling to find the clear hook for why this game exists or why you should definitely buy it. If you're looking for Darksiders lore, this isn't the place for it since there's no cutscenes and the game is taking way more comedic license this time around than it's ever done before.
Take it! Take it!
Come on, dude. We're the council's enforcers. You really think you can buy us with this worthless...
If you're looking for a really compelling action melee game, this is immediately hamstrung by the isometric perspective. If you're looking for an ARPG, this one just isn't that at all. My mind wanders towards what Genesis might have been if it did embrace the ARPG genre and offered all 4 horsemen as playable classes, and supported 4-player co-op. It had an interesting gear game that could really change up how characters were played. I personally would play the shit out of that game. I even think towards something like the superb Hades from Supergiant, which is another isometric action game that plays beautifully and offers a fair amount of depth. I would totally play a Darksiders game like that. Right now, from what little I've seen, Genesis feels like it's shaping up to be sort of Nintendo Switch fodder. Something fun to play while you're out in the go, but not your go-to when you get home and you're thinking about what you want to play on your console or your TV. This depth, this innovation may well be coming in future builds, so I absolutely don't want to jump to conclusions here, but these were my first impressions of the game, so I thought I would share them with you. I hope they are useful to you. If this video wasn't useful to you, perhaps Squarespace will be. Squarespace lets you build your own super professional looking website, and they make it really easy to do so with custom templates, intuitive design tools, and even stuff like web domains and hosting. You can even add stuff like a comments section to your website so you can start building a community around whatever it is that interests you, be it gaming or photography or pets or Japanese food or whatever floats your boat. You can set up your own website right now with the free trial, and if you want to commit, you can get 10% off your first purchase by clicking the referral link in the description below. Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and thank you for watching it.